Hello and welcome. In this video, Impressions, Jack Owens and the Bentonia School will explore a guitar style of country blues guitar. Now, country blues guitar is the acoustic rendition of blues music on the guitar, usually associated with rural areas, usually played solo, and was most popularly and classically recorded in the era between the world wars, so mostly in the 1920s and 1930s. Many famous country blues musicians include Blind Lemon Jefferson, Blind Blake, Reverend Gary Davis, Robert Johnson, Mississippi John Hurt, Mississippi Fred McDowell, lots more that I'm not even thinking of right now. This particular style was quite well known within the country blues, practiced by one of these musicians that recorded in the early 1930s named Skip James, and he was from a town called Bentonia, Mississippi. His style was distinctive from all those that I have mentioned in that he used a particular alternate tuning, that is, a way of tuning the guitar different from the standard E, A, D, G, B, E tuning, but rather tuning it to an open chord. And in this case, it is an open minor chord. So this tuning is usually used as an open E minor chord, or maybe even more commonly as an open D minor chord, that is one full tone down. To avoid associating it with a particular pitch like that, it's often called cross note tuning. And today we're going to explore the music of a musician also from Bentonia who was a contemporary of Skip James, but never recorded until I think maybe the 1960s or the 1970s, when he was discovered during a revival of that country blues music. Speaking of a man named Jack Owens, who was from Bentonia and lived there he was born in 1904 and he died in 1997. And I'm pretty sure that he lived in Bentonia or just outside of it on a farm for most or all of his life. I had the privilege and good fortune to meet him and visit with him one day in 1992. And there is a picture that I took of Jack Owens performing some of this music. So, if you are interested in the country blues guitar and you're interested in the Bentonia style, you would, as you probably are if you're still watching and listening, I'll just offer that this video may be used for instructional purposes. It may be used for ideas. It may be used for reference. What it does offer is not a note-for-note lesson on how Jack Owens played, but rather it offers my impression of that. So in some cases, what I express might be pretty close to a note-for-note rendition. In other cases, I may say something like, well, I feel like Jack Owens either did this or would do this, or when I am relating to Jack Owens' music, this is what occurs to me. So you can regard this as a combination of instructional and my own instructional based on Jack Owens' style. And there's plenty of recordings that I would encourage you to check out if you're interested in Jack Owens. Also many probably more well-known recordings of Skip James. But for the purpose of this, it's either comes directly from Jack Owens or it's my impressions. If you take this as direct instruction, then that's fine. I hope it's helpful. If you take it to help you relate to this music, then that's good. If you take it to help you think of your own impressions or come up with your own ideas, that's fine too. I think we all share in this music, apart from particular specific songs and copyrights of songs. Generally, these sorts of styles are we all sort of own them and relate to them in our own ways. It's really all comes down to a shared tradition, in my view. And while I refer to this as open E minor tuning, and while I refer to the key of E, as you're listening along with this, I'll let you know that everything that I am doing will be tuned down one full step. So if you play an E chord in standard tuning, it will sound something like this. But what I'll be playing will be pitched at D. So when in standard tuning, I make that E chord in the open position, it will actually be a D chord. And the reason for tuning down one full step is that instead of, to tune the guitar to an open tuning, instead of tuning some strings up, I'll tune the ones that wouldn't be involved down. And the reason for that is to lessen the tension on the neck of the guitar. So most people with acoustic guitars will tend to, if they use this open minor tuning, will tend to use it as open D minor. If you're just using open D tuning, you will do that as opposed to open E. A different kind of tuning that you hear in many country blues is sometimes called open A, but a lot of times people will use it as open G. And the tuning is the same, it's just what pitch it's at. So where on the neck, or how much tension there is on the strings, determines the pitch. So in this case, with standard tuning, the low and the high strings that would be E are D. But since we're playing a song that is, or since we're playing in a style and basing this on a song that uses many patterns that you may be already familiar with in the key of E, we'll just call it E. And we'll name the chords E and A and B, or B7. Just to make it easier to relate to and to use names of chords that if you're interested in this style and you play blues songs using 3 chords like this, maybe you play a lot in the standard 12-bar format, these will be familiar names of chords. And so we'll name the chords and we'll name the notes just to the extent that it's helpful in order to communicate what these things are. We won't really dwell too much on music theory. I think I relate to that and use it up to the point that it helps. But for me, it's mostly understanding what chords there are and where they are in relation to each other. So the 1 chord is the E, the 4 chord is the A, the 5 chord is the B, back to the 1 chord. So that's mostly how I think of it, and those are the names that I'll use. I'll use either the 1 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, or I'll use the names of the chords as if the root pitch was E, even though it's D. So let's think of this tuning as cross note. So the name of this tuning is cross note, so as to avoid tying it to a particular pitch that way. But we can think of it as open E minor, and we can think of the chords that we'll be using as E, A, and B for our 1, 4, and 5 chords, respectively. So now let's get into how this tuning works. So, starting from standard tuning, if we make an E chord, we usually make it like this, like that, and like that. So we have those 2 strings going up from A to B and up from D to E. So then we have E, B, E, and then we usually would have a G sharp note. So the string that's usually at G would be at G sharp, and then the top two strings open. So an E chord usually looks like this, and an E minor chord is just different by one note. So instead of that G sharp, we leave that at G. So we're left with only those two strings like that. And that is what this tuning will be. So again, pretending that we're in E, pitched at E, we will tune this string from there up to there, and we'll tune this string from there up to there. That way, we'll get a nice open E minor chord. So let's just go ahead and do that. And then this one. And now, struck completely open, we have that open E minor chord. And if actually, just to get started here, if we want to make that an E chord, just as if we're playing in standard tuning, all we have to do is this. And as we move into the music of Jack Owens, we're going to find that a lot of things that work in standard tuning in the key of E, Jack Owens tended to use, or at least the way I relate to his music as I listen to it. It sounds to me like he used a lot of things from standard tuning in the key of E. And what we realize here is that the top three strings are no different in standard tuning than they are in cross note tuning. The only two different strings are these ones. Strings 5 and 4 are the only ones different. So we still have the low E and the high E, and these strings, the top three, the G string, the B string, and the E string, are still the same. So when we consider idioms that are common in the key of E, standard tuning, we find things like this. This is this sort of triangle-shaped D chord, right? But a lot of times we can use it in E, just moved up one full step. So it's just that little triangle. Okay. Another common idiom is this one. So we have on the third string this, third string fourth fret, we have second string third fret. So just that little slant. And we hear that a lot in blues songs in the key of E. Another idiom that we hear a lot in the key of E is this. So we're up at the 7th fret on the first string and the 8th fret on the second string. There. And sometimes we're going to be bending that second string. And we can go. And that's our E note on the third string up at the 9th fret, just as it's the E note open first string. So idioms like are common in the playing of Jack Owens because, as I say, it seems to me, he played a lot in standard tuning in the key of E. So as we get into this, we're going to be seeing those idioms and some other ones that maybe, to me, differentiate the playing of Jack Owens from some of the other players in cross note, in particular, the very famous Skip James. So at this point, we will start to look at some of the particular constructs or licks. And I think what we'll do is we'll just go through those according to ones that happen when we're using the 1 chord, ones that happen when we're using the 4 chord, and ones that happen when we're using the 5 chord. Now, before we get into any particular licks in Jack Owens style, it's important to point out a really key aspect of his style is how he kept the beat, or how he maintained the groove of the song. And as I have heard a friend of mine point out that that this is just essential. I've heard it pointed out by many people, actually. But the best way I've heard it put is that without the timing, without the beat, without the groove, it's not music, it's just noise. So probably a lot of people watching this, or maybe, struggle just like myself to maintain that beat, to maintain that groove. And what I have found is that some of the great masters do that, even if they're playing solo. If they're playing solo, they don't have to have it be so consistent all the way through. And quite often you'll hear even some of these great masters speed things up. But what they do is they maintain a steady groove. Jack Owens did this with his foot. So I don't know if you can hear my foot or see my leg moving, but this is what Jack Owens did. Probably the most prominent and well-known great blues master that used this technique. I mean, they all did, but it's most prominent in the playing of John Lee Hooker, for example. But Jack Owens absolutely used his foot to keep that groove. Okay? If you're familiar with country blues styles, you'll probably be familiar with the notion of either the monotonic bass or the alternating bass. And the alternating bass is used in lots of finger-picking styles. And certainly country blues is foremost among those. Okay, so we'll use the monotonic bass, we'll use the alternating bass, we'll switch back and forth between them. Sometimes we'll leave it out altogether, and sometimes we'll pick it up. Leaving it out altogether and picking it back up is fine. You hear a lot of players do that, including Jack Owens. I find myself doing it. What I would suggest is that if that's what feels natural to you and comfortable to you, then go ahead and do it. But one way that I've heard it explained is that's fine to do as long as you do pick it up and keep that groove. And the way we do that is with the foot. So you see there, I stopped the bass, played some notes on the higher strings, and then picked it back up, but my foot was going the whole time. Okay? So that is, that's not really a Jack Owens specific thing, but it's a foundational thing that is essential for his style and almost any country blues style and almost any style in any other solo guitar rendition. Okay? So first, what we'll do is I'll just get right in to how Jack Owens would tend to start a lot of songs. And he would tend to go like this. So you see the 3 notes that he tended to start off things with. So he would start off with the A, go up to the B, go up to the D, and then back to the E. Okay? Another thing that Jack Owens used like throughout many songs that he played is the E7 chord. So the E7 chord, it's the same, as I mentioned, it's on the top three strings, it's the same in standard tuning or in cross note tuning, okay? So it's basically just third string, first fret, that makes an E chord, and then we go third fret on the second string, right? And that makes the E7. So instead of the E chord, we have the E7. I'll get my finger out of the way and illustrate that. So you're probably familiar with the E7 chord, even if you've taken your first look at country blues. It's used a lot. The key of E is used a lot, and of course the E7 chord is the one chord in any blues song in the key of E. So Jack Owens used this E7 chord a lot. If you listen to the music of Skip James, for me, I feel like I hear that less. I feel like it's much more prominent in Jack Owens' playing, and that's one thing that makes me think or helps me relate to his playing more in standard tuning, even though we're using cross note. Okay? And to set up that E7 chord, a lot of times he would just move up one note in it. Okay? So he would start like this, and then he would move up. So the way it would sound would be. And a lot of times he wouldn't sound that third string maybe. He would sound, on the first stroke, he would sound only this. So there it is open. That's part of the E chord. That would be the E7 chord, right? He would start one note down, okay? So he would start on the C sharp note, that would be in standard tuning. C sharp and E there. So he would start on that and he would move up like this. And then he would tend to only sound that third string on the second stroke. So it would sound like this. So if we combine it with how he would usually set up or introduce a song, even before he started getting into the main structure of it, it would sound like this. Okay? And a lot of times the fill-in for these will be the alternating bass and the top two strings just picked alternately like this. Okay, so we're picking these top two strings, and sometimes we're going back to this one, and sometimes we're doing a little hammer on there. So, again, I invite you to listen to Jack Owens' music closely and see what you hear there, see how you relate to it. But I feel like he used that a lot, and when I relate to his music, I find myself using this a lot. Now, let's get into another lick that I feel like is less specific to Jack Owens. And in fact, the way I have heard this lick actually named is as the Bentonia signature lick. And I'll give you what I relate to as sort of the core notes of this. And then we'll see how it's usually expressed, and we'll see maybe a couple of variations on it. So the core notes of this lick are, and Okay, so we're using the third string on the second fret, then open, and then the fourth string open. Okay, and the fourth string, remember, if we were in regular standard tuning, it would be the fourth string on the second fret. But in cross note tuning, it's the fourth string open. So it goes like, and then we're back to this G note that goes with the E chord. Okay, so, and that is quite often hammered on. In fact, I feel like for the signature Bentonia lick, it's just about always hammered on. So it goes like this. And then a lot of times it's followed up with those two notes that we heard in the previous lick, right? So it's now, I mentioned those three notes are the core notes, but what I'll do now is I'll add the note that is usually sort of the default opening note for this signature Bentonia lick, and that will be up at the fourth fret. Okay, so the sound we'll get then is like this. And you'll notice I'm sliding up to that fourth fret, and that's quite a common technique too. So it can be, or it can be. And you heard maybe some extra noise when I hit that note, and that is the beauty of our cross note tuning. So you couldn't really do this in standard tuning, but if you are a little messy, and a lot of this music is, and the way I relate to it quite often is, that note will have a little bit of an adjacent string sort of bleeding into it. So instead of just, we'll get this. So we'll have that D string ring out, and it sounds kind of cool. Notice sometimes I'm using the alternating bass, and sometimes I'm using the monotonic, and sometimes I'm just leaving it out. And any of those are good as long as my foot is keeping that groove. Maybe it's okay to keep the groove just in your head, but it really, I have come to find that it helps a lot to have the foot keeping the groove. Okay, so that's like the default signature Bentonia lick. And you will find that listening to Jack Owens. Probably, I feel like if he doesn't use it explicitly in the recordings that I listen to, and I'd have to go back and listen closely, the way I relate to those recordings, it's used. I think if you listen to the recordings of Skip James, you'll hear that lick quite a lot. If you listen to his recordings from 1931 or from when he was rediscovered in the 60s country blues revival. I think you can probably even see videos of him using that. For example, at the Newport Folk Festival, there's some precious video of Skip James playing, and you can see him actually doing that signature lick. Now, there's a couple of variations of that, so we don't always have to go. We can use this. We can use the second string on the third fret and go. Okay? Or we can use the first string open. Sliding up into that E7 chord, that's definitely signature Jack Owens sound. moving on from the signature Bentonia lick, let's look at some of the other things that I feel like are common in Jack Owens playing, and or that I find come to me in how I relate to Jack Owens playing. And so some of this is moving out from the really sort of what's comes native to that cross note tuning to just plain standard key of E tuning. Okay, and now I'll just express the reminder here that we are still working in the one chord. So in the key of E, we're still basing what we're doing around the E chord, or the one chord for blues in the key of E. So what we find Jack Owens sometimes doing is using, and I think I mentioned this at the outset as one of the idioms that is common in the key of E, and that is this little triangular shaped chord. So if we're in the key of D, this is how this is usually known as a D shape, okay? So we have these two. We have the third string and the first string, and if we add one fret up from those to make a little triangle, we get that nice triad that's the major chord. And sorry to be dropping the, if it sounds too much theory, that's about as far as I'll go with that. But from this D shape that makes a D chord, we move it up 2 frets and we get an E chord. And that makes sense. Just D, E. Okay? And there's our bass E string. There's our open E string. And what we hear from Jack Owens, maybe before I break it down any further, I'll just exhibit sort of how it sounds to me and how I relate to it. See there how that figure there can sort of mix and match, so it can be used like that, and maybe then the next phrase will drop in the signature Bentonia lick, and you see how they go together. Sometimes I'm using the bass, sometimes not, but I'm keeping the groove with my foot when I do this, okay? So I think that is very common in Jack's playing, and you know, if you go back and listen closely and you don't find it, maybe you'll relate to it, or just take it from me that that's how I relate to it. And then let's just visit another really common idiom that we find in the key of E, and we do find that Jack Owens uses this as well. So you'll hear him start off a verse or start off a song. And then instead of doing what I just did, also there, you'll notice that we're using the E bass, and then we're using the octave of it. So we're doing, I'm sorry, not the octave of it. We're going from the E bass like that, and then to the D note. So sometimes he'll use the D note there, sometimes he'll use it on the 4th string open, but in any case, he'll use this. And he'll use this note as well. it off just with those two open notes that make up the E chord. So we can go. And while we're at it, that's like another little variation on, it's not really the signature Bentonia lick, but something that we hear a lot in the key of E. And then we'll go back to our Jack idiom, okay? Okay, so at this point, let's maybe segue into a 4 chord, okay? Now, I feel like when in Jack Owens music, and also I think in Bentonia style in general, I guess go and listen closely to some of Skip James's recordings, but I feel like the 4 chord is not always featured really that prominently, okay? So you don't really hear that like you would in a regular old 12-bar blues. But you do hear the 4 chord, and I think sometimes you might hear it more from Jack Owens than you do generally, or maybe more so than you hear it from Skip James, depending on what song. So the way I will introduce it is moving from this lick that we had on the 1 chord. So we've explored him making this E7 chord, making this E chord, okay, and using this. One thing that I feel like is very telltale of Jack Owens' style is to move from this to this 4 chord. And for those of you who are familiar with what an A chord looks like, it is the A string and then open, and then the D, G, and B strings fretted at the 2nd fret. Okay, and I'm talking strictly in standard tuning. So some people will fret those 3 strings just like that, and leave that top string open there. Some people will use these 3 fingers, but in any case, we're fretting this string, and this string, the 4th, 3rd, and 2nd string at the 2nd fret. But since we're in cross note tuning, the 4th string is already there. Okay, so the 4th string is not the D. The 4th string is an E. See, it's an octave. So the 4th string is already on that E note. So to make an A chord, all we have to do is fret the G string and the B string as if we're making the A chord. So here we are. That is our A chord, and if we will hear it in relation to the 1 chord, to the E chord, there's the E chord, and here is our A chord. You'll notice I'm not using the open A string like I would in standard tuning, because the open A string is no longer an A string in cross note, it's a B. So that doesn't work for an A chord. But these 4 strings do. And the way I'm going to, and this is as a way to introduce what Jack Owens commonly did when transitioning from the 1 chord to the 4. You'll hear him do that a lot from this figure. Okay, So now I'm going to go to the A chord after this version of the 1. So we'll go on the 1 chord, and he doesn't linger very long on that, but I am really wanting to make a point of expressing this as part of his style because I feel like it's a really important element. So you'll hear him. Okay? But the notes that you hear from him are very explicitly these 3 notes. And I will at this point need to segue to a very distinctive rendition of the 4 chord that Jack Owens uses, and it does not use that A. It uses this note here. Okay, so this is we are on a B note for our 5th string, and what we're going to do is go up to C, then C sharp, and then D. Okay, so the D note doesn't usually fit in the A chord, and you won't hear it. You'll hear it almost no place else in blues. I feel like it's just very distinctive to Jack Owens. Okay, but what it is it's this note here. So here we are on our 1 chord. To the 4 chord, he uses this, and it may not sound sweet or natural to your ear as an A chord, and it's not meant to, and it's just very, this is the essence. I feel like this note here on the 4 chord is the essence of what Jack Owens did, and I'll just demonstrate it a little bit. We're going to go to the 4 chord, and we're going to hang on it a little bit and just sort of vamp a little bit on how Jack Owens did use the 4 chord. Now to the 4 chord. So you see what we're doing is we're using this D note, and for our treble notes we're using this 1st string 2nd fret and 1st string 3rd fret. And actually it never goes like that, it goes. So it's either these 3 notes or these 3 notes. Actually 4 notes. So those are the notes that you will hear when he's using this D note for his bass in the 4 chord, and that is Jack Owens. Okay, and now and then he'll go right up to that octave of the E and back to the low E. Or sometimes he'll go. get this into your head. Learn to relate to it. If you're really interested in the style of Jack Owens, listen to his music, and you will hear this, and you may come to relate to it. And if you do, I think you will relate to Jack Owens' music in a similar way to which I relate to it. But it's all about this. But now let's look at a few variations that he uses for this, okay? So it's not always just this. Sometimes he moves up and down between this note and this note. What I should do also is point out that for convenience and comfort in terms of using these notes, I find it most convenient to use my second finger, my middle finger, on this note here, and actually to move that up and down while I am using those combinations of treble notes. So that takes a little getting used to. I feel like it's helpful to have it in your head and really to relate to it. Rather than just try to sort of sit down and play it. And again, I encourage you to listen closely to Jack Owens' music. There's plenty of recordings that you can find, and get that into your head. And now I'm going to go into another variation that you will hear him do. So it's not always just this. And it's not always just this. Sometimes he introduces an alternating bass, and he does, and most of us are used to an alternating bass being low, high, like 6th string, 4th string, 6th string, 4th string. But what you'll hear Jack do, and you'll hear this in some other musicians' styles, is the 1 beat will be on the higher string, and the 2 beat will be on the lower string. So you'll hear it like this. I'm not sure if I counted that out exactly, but as I said, we can do this within a 12-bar format, or it will, if you want to do it within a 12-bar format, certainly it can fit. So a little disclaimer on whether that counting will come out even there. But the point is that you'll hear him doing that. So you'll hear him moving back and forth, but also going like that a lot when he spends the 2 bars or whatever it is that in terms of how he's phrasing the song on the 4 chord. That is what you'll hear a lot. So again, to transition to it, sometimes you'll hear him do. make that nice A chord. And then go to that note that doesn't really fit with the A chord. So you'll hear it like. So to put it in a little more context, finishing that off with the signature Bentonia lick at that point. But so on the 1 chord doing this, transitioning to the 4 chord, the Jack Owens Essence 4 chord, and then finishing off back to the 1 chord, and then landing back on another measure of the 1 chord, maybe with the signature lick. Okay, so that is really, I feel like, the heart of Jack Owens' style. What I also want to illustrate here is another thing that he does commonly when he is using this. Oh, and here, I'm not sure that you'll hear Jack Owens do this, but I feel like this fits. So up here at the 7th and 8th frets, and then that's what I will sometimes do, is I'll come down there. Even before I... So just these 2 notes. And then move into that Jack Owens 4 chord. But here's the variation, okay? So it basically goes like we've been doing up here at the 7th and 8th frets. Up through the Jack Owens signature bass note on the 4 chord, but then finishing it off with this little flourish. So here I'll demonstrate it again. So on with the signature Bentonia lick. Okay, so that really I feel like is the heart of this exhibition for Jack Owens style. But I also feel like we need to get into a couple of other things. One of which is his use of the 5 chord. So in standard 12-bar key of E blues 1-4-5, the 5 chord is going to be the B. Okay, and as we've seen, with this shape here for the B7 chord, of course we can't make that in cross note. Okay, what we will hear Jack Owens do, and Skip James uses this pretty prominently as well. In fact, if you listen to Skip James's Devil Got My Woman blues, Jack Owens has a similar version of it. I think that's just called Devil Blues. This version of the 5 chord is very prominent. And in fact, you'll hear in that song, I think in Skip James's version at least, and a lot of people's versions of this, you'll hear this 5 chord actually starting off the verse, which is it's a reasonably common technique in blues music. You'll hear various Chicago musicians start off songs on the 5 as well. But in cross note tuning here, the chord is this. Okay, and the bass components of that we can get with the open 5th string and the 4th string at the 2nd fret. Okay, and the shape, let's just make sure that the shape is clear here. So we are using the 4th string on the 2nd fret, okay, and then we're using the 3rd string on the 1st fret, okay, so just like that. And then we're using the 1st string on the 2nd fret, so it looks like that. Hope that's clear. Okay, so basically we're starting with those two, 4th string, 3rd string, and then we're adding the 1st string. And then what we're doing is we're adding the 2nd string on the 3rd fret. And it doesn't really sound and ring out like a B chord or a B7 chord. And those of you who are into theory and would like to name the notes and the intervals and all that are quite welcome to do so. I'm not going to dwell on that. I'm just going to say that this is, like from the Devil Blues, what really sounds like the part of the aspect of the sound that really gets to me, that I really relate to. Okay, and you'll find Jack Owens using this not just to like lead off the Devil Blues with the 5, but rather when he goes to the 5 in like a 12-bar type of format that he may be playing a song in, he'll use this. So, and the way, so I'll just demonstrate either what I hear or what I relate to or the way it makes me want to play it, and that is. Okay, so sometimes I'm using the 1st string and the 2nd string at the 3rd fret and then the 2nd string open. I'm usually using those 2 bass strings and sort of brushing them so I get that nice sound. And sometimes I'm just focusing on the 4th, 3rd, and 2nd strings. And sometimes I'm doing that and then I'm adding in that 1st string so it rings out. So let's just see if we'll go through how this might sound in a Jack Owens tune. I know we're not following the form strictly, but a lot of times after that 4 chord, we're back on the 1. Now when we're coming to the 5 chord, I feel like a lot of times the way I want to lead into it, and I guess it's because that's how I relate to it or that's what I've heard Jack Owens do, but I want to go from this note that's part of the E7, I want to go and then to what would be that 5. Okay, so I want to go, but not like that, of course, but like this. Okay, so, and that's actually those same two notes I just did up here, but here they are in this shape that we're using. So, you'll notice at first I wasn't using the first string much, but then I bring it in there. So I'm going. And when I'm done with this 5 chord, I'm wanting to finish off and get back to the 1, and I'm usually doing something like this. So something that maybe will lead into a variation of the Bentonia lick to get back to the 1. So but now let's get into, just as we did on the 4 chord when we found that Jack Owens sometimes alternated with a lower bass note, he does that on this 5 chord as well. So instead of just instead of that monotonic bass, he'll use this note here. So this is essentially, if we're all pitched at E and everything and in the key of E, this will be an F sharp. And you may be familiar with this from playing a B7 chord in standard tuning, because this F sharp note works as a low bass note there as well. And you'll notice that I'm doing it with my thumb, and in fact, to use it in this situation, you need to use your thumb because your other 4 fingers are occupied with this chord. Okay, so instead of that, it's going to be. So that is how we're then finishing it off. But this, you definitely hear Jack use this 5 chord, and you definitely hear him use this bass, this alternating low bass. Okay, so now we have a few more things to get through in terms of commonly used variations. So I think the way I will lead into this is from getting from this 5 chord back to the 1 instead of what we'll do is something that is not it's not exclusive to this style or this tuning. It's a standard idiom, I feel like, in the key of E, playing blues or otherwise, and that is using a unison note. So I'm sliding up to really what is this E note here and playing that in unison. So on the 2nd string at the 5th fret and the 1st string open. So you see, if I can make it a little more clear in the video here, I'm using that 5th fret on the 2nd string and the 1st string open. And that is a nice little transition between that 5 chord and getting back to the 1. And we might go from that to the signature Bentonia lick. So we might do something like this. So that's pretty common that Jack Owens does, I think, or at least it's pretty common in my mind anyway. So that is one transition that we can use from the 5 back to the 1. Another thing that we could do is, I think this is an idiom that we mentioned at the outset that's common in standard tuning in the key of E, and that is this. And you will hear Jack Owens a lot of times. He'll use this to transition, or he'll maybe use this to start off a song. So he may start off a song. Or as a fill-in, actually, more commonly as a fill-in between verses. And you'll notice that we can use this, and we can actually let that 4th string in a kind of a messy fashion bleed into it, right? We wouldn't have to fret that like we would in standard tuning, that 4th string. We can let it ring open, and it still works with this chord, just like it would with the A chord. But it will work with this chord here. So this is actually an E7, right? So if that's an A, this is an E7, but we're just using these 2 notes of it, and we're actually letting that E ring out there. But you'll hear this in tons of stuff. If you sit down and listen to Eric Clapton play Before You Accuse Me or something, he'll use this lick. But Jack Owens, like, a million other blues players playing blues in the key of E, will use this a lot. You don't hear Skip James use it, I don't think. And it's really not that common in terms of what is familiar for people who are interested in the Bentonia school and this cross note tuning. If we're into the cross note tuning with the minor key, a lot of times we're not dwelling on stuff that is common in standard tuning. But Jack Owens does. So Jack Owens uses that. He uses this. And he also uses this. So to transition from that 5 chord, back to the signature Bentonia lick. So he might go. Or he might go. Or instead of striking those like a chord, sometimes you'll hear him articulate the notes. And when I hear, or when I go and articulate these notes, sometimes I want to fill out that E7 chord as well. So I want to fret that 1st string. So I might do that, okay? But then I might want to finish off that E7 chord and do. Like that. I'm not sure I've heard Jack Owens do that, but sometimes that occurs to me if I'm articulating the notes instead of just doing this. If I'm okay, and now I want to get to one of the other essential things, one of the essential ways that, at least how I relate to it, departs from the usual sort of what we know as the signature Bentonia lick. will, and I'm segueing to that right now because I feel like I hear Jack Owens move to that from this, or from this. And let me just get right to what it is that I am referring to. Right? So instead of the Bentonia lick, I'm going to this. So 4th fret, 4th string, 4th fret, open, 5th string, 2nd fret, 4th string open. So it's these notes. And I hear Jack Owens do this. I either hear it in his recordings or as I say, I relate to it in my own mind a lot when he comes out of this. Or so again, that is along with this for the 4 chord. The other really distinctive Jack Owens sound for me is this, as an alternative to the Bentonia lick. And the thing is, I feel like it's important to explore all of these different licks because a lot of playing this music is mixing and matching them. So in a lot of these idioms, I've said, well, you could do this or you could do that. You could do the Bentonia lick. You could do this. You could do this. Or you could do this. All of these things can be pieced together. They're like pieces in a puzzle that you can fit together and use according to how you relate to it, use according to how you would feel like expressing it. Like myself, you can listen to Jack Owens use these licks, use these pieces, use these elements, these idioms. You can listen to him and draw inspiration from that, and or you can understand what they are, see how they sound to you, try executing them, and then fit them into your own playing. Because that, I think, is the main thing that I'm directing these explanations at is for people like myself to sort of understand some of these things, see how they work, see some of the nuts and bolts of what makes them up, and then be able to use that. Because for me, it's about being able to play this music, in some cases exactly as the artist has done, in other cases just to the extent that I'm able to, and in yet other cases in ways that occur to me, in ways that I relate to, that aren't necessarily what that artist has done, not necessarily limited by some, constrained by some limitation of my own skill, but maybe and hopefully as an expression of me communicating at an emotional level, which is really what music is about. So let me just get to one additional lick that I don't want to leave out before we wrap this up. Oh, and again, let's just review that last one a little bit because it's just so important. And again, interchangeable with. that as an alternative to the Bentonia lick. Okay, so now let's get to this other thing that you do hear Jack do, and you hear in lots of blues in the key of E, and it's a little run that starts up here. So, in fact, you'll hear Jack Owens start off his songs with this a lot. So a lot of times that's the way he actually gets to this, is he gets to it by... So all we're doing here is we're just using the 3rd and 1st strings at the 7th fret. And again, no difference between this and standard tuning. Since we're on the top 3 strings, it's the same as standard tuning, okay? And we're using this, and then we're going up to the 9th fret. And we're doing that so as to then move into this bread and butter E blues lick. Okay, so you'll hear Jack go. Oh, and when we're at the 7th fret, that 2nd string open also works, and it sounds kind of cool. So we're fretting those two, but we're using the 2nd string open also. So it sounds like this. And then we're going up to the 9th fret. And then we're going into this. So and a lot of times we're not going up there and back there and then to that. You see that change looks a little awkward, and it is, but rather what we're doing is we're going. And then we're just going right to that, and then we have that middle finger right there for the 8th fret. Oops, like that. And of course, we can always finish it off with those two top strings open. So you'll hear Jack doing. And then for me, I can just go to the top string open, 2nd string, 2nd fret, before I even move into, as we have covered already. Okay, so again, Jack will go. And now one last flourish that sometimes he'll use in between verses, and he'll use this same trick with the 3rd and 1st strings at the same fret, like that. But he'll start up at the 12th fret. And if you're familiar with, I'm just going to make an example in, like, it's still in blues, but it's a completely different genre. But I'll make an example of a classic Freddie King lick. And I'm thinking of what he uses in The Stumble. So Freddie King in The Stumble, in between bars or in between verses, he'll come down like this. So he'll use just the 1st and 3rd string all the way down the neck. But with Jack Owens, we're not going all that far down, but you will hear him do this. So it's basically just third string, first string, both on the same fret, and starting at the 12th fret, and just coming down like this. 12th down to 9th fret. So it's kind of like what we just did a minute ago, but we're starting at the 12th fret instead of going from the 7th to the 9th fret. We're going from the 12th down to the 9th. And sometimes just adding that 9th fret there. And either open, or you may want to land on that same note, the E. Third string, 9th fret, or open. Okay, so I think that is, I'm probably forgetting a few licks, but the listener, the viewer here, is invited to explore Jack Owens recordings and listen to them closely. You're invited to use this video for whatever purpose, whether it be to copy it exactly, whether it be to make Jack Owens music more accessible, or whether it be to get ideas of your own and relate to this, or listen to Jack Owens music and relate to that, or compare and contrast it to Skip James. There's a contemporary musician in Bentonia that is very well known, and he has assumed the mantle of really carrying the Bentonia school, and I'm speaking of a gentleman by the name of Jimmy Duck Holmes. And he also is the proprietor of one of the last juke joints in the South, in Bentonia. It's called the Blue Front Cafe. And he is a practitioner, an authentic one, because he's from Bentonia. I've visited there once, as I mentioned. So listen to Jimmy Duck Holmes' recordings, and maybe you'll hear some elements of Jack Owens playing in those, because as I understand it, Jimmy learned a lot from Jack, as I have. I didn't learn that much that day that I visited with him in 1992, but I sort of filed it away. I made a recording while I was with him, and I've listened to that, and I've listened to the recordings that he's made in the 60s and 70s and 80s. I've internalized it. I've related to it for myself. I have studied the Bentonia style and cross-note tuning with various groups, larger and smaller, and mostly focusing on Skip James, but all the while comparing and contrasting Jack Owens' style. And it's Jack Owens' style that I feel like I relate to more directly. And so my purpose here is to share that with you and invite you to relate to it. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, if you've listened or watched all the way through, and hope to cross paths at some point and maybe see you at the Blue Front Cafe. Okay, so with that, so long.